and we will be starting in just a few moments. Meanwhile, let us know in the chat where you're watching from, what island, what city. We'd love to know who's with us. Just a couple more minutes while we let some people into the room. Welcome to Aha Wahine Kūhinapapa. On this January 14th, we're featuring two amazing wahine from the island of Lānaʻi. We're going to learn a lot about the island, I think, tonight. Let us know where you're calling in for or watching from. We'd love to know. And we'll give it just a few more minutes before we get started. But we see you. We'll be starting soon. Great, good to see you. Aloha. Oh, there you go, from Pa'ala'a, Waialua, Pa'ala'a. Provo, excellent. You're up late. Olympia, Washington. Aloha from Kaimuki. Wow. San Francisco, Molokai, Hanapepe, Carlsbad, California. Wow, that's a lot of people calling from outside of Hawaii. Awesome. All right, we'll be starting in just a few minutes. We are live streaming this. Besides the Zoom, we're live streaming this on Facebook. So if you want to share, go to your own Facebook page. You can pull up Aha Wahine or any of our partner organizations, such as mine, Papaololokahi, and you can share screen. You can share this presentation. We'd be grateful for that. California, Waipahu, aloha. Let's see, we've got 2 or 3 islands. We've got about 5 states represented already. Oh, wait, if we have one from Facebook, that means we're live on Facebook. From Florida, let's see, what time is it in Florida? Like 1 o'clock in the morning. Aloha, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to the 5th episode of Aha Wahine Kūhinapapa. This is a webinar series, and you can see that it says that we're celebrating intergenerational mana. This is the 5th episode where we have presented to you family clusters, mothers and daughters and sisters, and 3 generations even. And tonight we have a mother and daughter from the island of Lānaʻi. Featuring Martha and Annella Evans. We'll get started in just a couple of moments. You can see them standing by. If you want to tune in via Facebook or Instagram, you can share it with your friends or your networks or your workplace. We present this series to you through the end of March, and it looks like we might be able to extend it, but for sure through the end of March, thanks to the goodwill and support of Hawaii Nui Akea at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, to Hawaii People's Fund, to Papaololokahi, and OEV TV. Mahalo nui to all. And let's see, I'm going to stop share so that we can go into, so that you have a chance to meet our guests. So tonight we will be meeting Martha Evans and Annella Evans. I will be one of your moderators tonight. My name is Kim Ku'ule Burney with Papaololokahi. Our other moderator is?
Aloha, I am Ka'iolani Odom with Kokua Kalihi Valley. ready to get started. I've been looking forward to this all week. I met Martha and Annella, geez, I don't even know how many years ago it was, but Herbert was doing an Ipono program on Lānaʻi where I met them. And then over the years, I've continued to hear their names come up when there's been talk or things going on Lānaʻi. So really excited to hear their story tonight. Martha Evans is a daughter of Moses Kale Nahono Pi'ilani Haya Jr. and Gertrude Barbara Thomas, born and raised on Oahu, the eldest of 6 children and the oldest grandchild of both sets of grandparents. She grew up in a multi-generational household with Portuguese grandparents, and weekends were spent in Kailua and at Punalu'u with her Hawaiian grandparents, aunties and uncles, and cousins that provided her with a rudimentary understanding of what it meant to be Hawaiian. Martha attended Sacred Hearts Academy in the University of Hawaii, where she earned both bachelor and master degrees in elementary education. She started her teaching career on Oahu. In 1976, she relocated to Lānaʻi, where she was a teacher and school administrator for 36 years. In 1977, Martha married Andrew Edward Evans, stayed on Lānaʻi, and raised their children, Kapali and Ānela, to love the island. Martha is a founding member of Lanaians for Sensible Growth, a citizen group dedicated to cultural and historic preservation, natural resource management, and social and economic justice for Lānaʻi. LSG gave residents a voice in a company town as it transitioned from a pineapple plantation to a destination resort. She is also a founding member of the Lānaʻi Culture and Heritage Center. Although she now lives on Oahu, she still considers Lānaʻi her home and looks forward to the day when she can return permanently. Welcome.
Oh, that's lovely. I only know Martha from her bit in the 1-hour documentary Kaho'olawe Aloha Aina. So when I met Annella and then got to know Annella, I was thrilled to find out that Martha Evans was her mother. So Annella Evans, the daughter of Andrew and Martha Evans, she was raised in Ko'ele and Lānaʻi City. From a young age, Annella was taught the values of aloha aina and ohana by both her parents and her kupuna, including her hanai Tutu and Papa, Rebecca and Ernest Richardson. With the encouragement of Tutu Rebecca, Annella began dancing hula at the age of 4. Hula encouraged her love of Olelo Hawaii and all Hawaiian culture. Annella was very close to her late father, who was a skilled hobbyist craftsman. From her father, Annella gained a love of working with her hands, particularly crafting lei hulu, which she learned from her mama. Annella went on to attend high school at Kamehameha Schools Kapalama and then earned a bachelor's and master's degrees in Hawaiian studies from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. While in college, Annella became involved with the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana, which is where we met. Annella currently resides back home on Lānaʻi, returning home 5 years ago. So aloha to you both.
Aloha.
Aloha. We're going to be asking you a lot of questions about yourselves and what it's like to live and raise a family and grow up on Lānaʻi. But I know that it was very important for you folks to set the sense of place. So maybe we can start with you, Annella, and tell us a little bit about your home island.
Hano Lānaʻi ke kaunaoa kohu kapa hula ka upoʻohiwi. E ola Lānaʻi a Kaululaau he akuma koe o mai oe. Aloha mai kākou. The chant that I just did, the short chant, was actually one that was published in a Hawaiian language newspaper in 1922. And it was written for Ha'alelea, who was an ali'i of the Palawai area on Lānaʻi. And that particular oli speaks about how Lānaʻi is distinguished by the lei kauna'oa, that is draped over the shoulders of its wearer like a feather cloak. And then it pays homage to Kaululaau, who is a very noted figure in Lānaʻi's history. Sort of the history of human settlement on Lānaʻi begins with Kaululaau, according to native tradition. He was a chief from Lahaina, a young chief who was known to be very mischievous, but he was also cunning and a problem solver. And so he, because of his mischievous ways and because he was kolohe, he was banished to Lānaʻi, which at the time was believed to have been only occupied or inhabited by spirits. And these spirits made it very difficult for a human population to establish themselves on the island. So Kaululaau was sent here by his father, who was Kaka'alaneo, and genealogical records and estimates sort of place their existence in about the 1400s. So Kaululaau came to Lānaʻi, and he was able, because he was a trickster, he was able to trick the ghosts and kill them. And on the day that he was able to defeat the king of the ghosts, the king of the spirits, whose name was Pahulu, the island became known as Lānaʻi a Kaululaau. So Lānaʻi means day of conquest of Kaululaau, right? So part of my work these past 5 years especially, and part of my mother's work as well, is to help to reclaim that power in the name of our island, right? And to sort of understand how that sort of became neglected. One has to understand the history of land tenure and the way things sort of played out on Lānaʻi, right? So one of the questions that I get asked probably at least 5 times a week is, how does one person become to own an entire island? Because the most recent sale was highly publicized and high profile, people assume that it started there, right? But one of the lessons that I've learned from Lānaʻi, and especially from Kahoʻolawe, and one of the lessons that, one of the earliest Aloha warriors of the Kahoʻolawe movement, George Helm, always taught was do your homework, right? So land tenure on Lānaʻi and private ownership of land basically began with the mahele. In the mahele, only 55 native tenants were granted kuleana rights on Lānaʻi. 8 of the ahupua'a were retained by the government, and 5 were awarded to the lesser chiefs. That calls for 13 total ahupua'a, and there are 13 total ahupua'a on our island. From there, a man named Walter Murray Gibson, who was a very close friend and advisor to Kalakaua, came to Lānaʻi with the Mormon settlement and began entering into leases with the government, as well as began trading land with chiefs for land in Oahu. And so he came to Lānaʻi in the 1860s. By the time of his death, which was in the late 1870s, he had fee simple ownership and the leasehold rights to the entire island, minus those 55 kuleana lots. His daughter, Tallulah, and her husband Frederick Hazelden, then took over, and they entered into a bunch of ventures on the island, economic ventures, including sugar, sheep ranching. At the time, it's recorded that Lānaʻi was the primary mutton provider for the Kingdom of Hawaii. And then at about the turn of the century, they had some economic woes, so they were forced to mortgage the island. And then came Charles Gay, who is the same Gay and Robinson family that is current owners of Ni'ihau. So Charles Gay came to Lānaʻi, and by 1907, he had fee simple ownership of all of the island. And then the land changed hands several times with the Baldwins. The Baldwins owned the land, owned Lānaʻi in the early, about 1910-ish. And that's when a man by the name of George Monroe came to Lānaʻi from New Zealand to manage Lānaʻi Ranch. And he transitioned the ranch from sheep growing operations to cattle. George Monroe is also famous because he was the one who initiated the planting of pine trees on the island. And that was done to help to draw water to recharge the aquifers of the island. So Lānaʻi is a relatively dry island compared to our neighboring islands of Molokai and Maui. Mauna Kahalawai, which is known as the West Maui Mountains, right? Pu'ukukui gets 36 inches of rain a month, whereas Lānaʻi gets 36 inches of rain a year. And our sustaining factor, because we don't get a lot of rainfall, is the fog that is drawn by the forest. So the intent of the pine trees were to stretch up into the atmosphere and catch the fog drip, and then allow that fog drip to penetrate the lava rock and recharge our aquifers so that Lānaʻi had drinking water to sustain itself. So water was always a big challenge on Lānaʻi. Even in traditional times, it talks about how the native residents had very unique ways of gathering water. For example, they would oil kapa and set it in the fields so that the fog that settled in the fields in the early morning hours would condensate on that kapa, and then they could have that kapa for drinking water. And then it also talks about how they would go around and squeeze, the ʻaʻaliʻi bushes and things like that to allow for them to have water, right? So squeeze that condensation off of those plants to gather water, right? So water proved a challenge on the island. It still does prove a challenge, and it proved a challenge throughout the 1980s and such, when there were big talks of development, which my mom will get into later. But then in 1920, James Dole came along and purchased the island to transform it into a pineapple plantation. At that time, there were less than 100 native residents living on Lānaʻi. So from a pre-contact population of about 6,000 native residents to in the early 1900s, less than 100. And that, was caused by a variety of factors. First one being in 1778, Lānaʻi was raided by Kalaniʻopuʻu because Maui was at war with Hawaii Island, right? And Lānaʻi always fell under the jurisdiction of Maui. So at that time, there was a large amount of the population decimated. And then after that came Western contact, disease. People moved off island, in the late 1800s because, now economic viability became a factor, right? It was no longer viable to sustain one's family on fishing and farming. You had to make money, right, to sustain your family. And there was a lack of opportunity here to do that. So people moved away, right? They moved to Lahaina, they moved to Oahu, things like that. Beginning in 1920, in the early 20s, there was a large influx of immigrant laborers who came to Lānaʻi to work on the pineapple plantation. And that's when Lānaʻi City was developed to support plantation operations. In 1951, the workers carried out a 201-day strike in which one of the conditions that came out of that was, after that strike, they then were allowed to purchase homes from the company. So that was the first sort of precedence in which people were then allowed to have the opportunity to purchase homes and the land under their homes on Lānaʻi. So now about 20%, I would say, of the residents own their homes, and the rest lease from the company, from the company, the landowner, I should say. So let's see. And then the next sort of milestone was in 1985, when a venture capitalist by the name of David Murdoch purchased Lānaʻi, or purchased majority shareholdership, is that the word? I'm not sure, of Dole Foods, and attained Lānaʻi in his portfolio. And it was actually, though, as early as the 70s in which plans were slated to transition Lānaʻi from a pineapple plantation to a luxury resort destination. And that was sort of going along with I guess, the flow of the economy in Hawaii at the time, right? There was a major push to transition out of agriculture and into the tourism industry. At that time, there were as many as, I think, 11 luxury resorts planned for the island. And when David Murdoch took over, I was born in 1985, and my mom and my dad were working full time at that time. And I'll let my mom tell the story of how she became involved in sort of the politics of the island and that story. So I'll end my history lesson there, and then we can go into her mo'olelo and her story.
That was so interesting, Ānela, and mahalo for starting out with that oli too. I think that sets us right in the place, right on the island. I feel like we know a little bit about it now. So Martha, you weren't originally born on Lānaʻi, but we just learned that you went there, you got a job, and tell us how you came to stay there for so long.
Yes, I moved to Lānaʻi in 1976. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what was happening in education in the mid-70s, but basically HSTA, the teacher union, got started. And as a result of that first strike, 600 of us lost our jobs. And so I subbed for a year, taught at a Catholic school for 2 years, and I said, the heck with this. I need to get back into public education. And the job on Lānaʻi came up, and so I took it with the intent of being there for 3 years, because at that time, in order for a teacher to gain tenure, he or she had to teach for 3 years and 1 day. So I figured, okay, I can do this. Well, little did I know that Lānaʻi had other plans for me. Um, I met my husband there. He had been working for the phone company for a while, and he he bought me a horse, and I guess the rest is history. He said, "Well, I can take care of it if you don't come back next year." And it was like, "Oh my gosh, I guess I have to stay. I guess I have to come back." And so
Take
I
care of
think
your
that
horse.
he kept my horse. That was the best decision that I ever made. Growing up on Oahu, as you shared earlier, as you shared earlier, you know, I am Portuguese, Greek, Hawaiian, Chinese. We lived with my maternal grandparents and very traditional Portuguese Greek. And that's how I was raised. And then sometimes we went to Grandma and Grandpa Haya's house and, you know, went camping with family, but very little connection with who I was as a Hawaiian. Um, my experience at the University of Hawaii during what is referred to as a Hawaiian Renaissance opened my eyes to some of those, you know, to what was happening in Hawaii, what I was blinded to because of my upbringing, as well as my frame of reference, had nothing to do with the issues that were finally coming to light in the mid 70s. So when I moved to Lanai, I discovered an entirely different um, perspective. It is a very small island. The Hawaiian community there is very small, but I think between my husband, and he was very good friends with the Richardsons and the Moritas, and through the their willingness, the community's willingness to accept me and to allow me to be a part of the Hawaiian experience on the island and to visit those places that were before never known to me. All of that helped me to understand that this is a very, very special place. And this is where I wanted to make my home for my husband and my family. And so that's kind of how I came to Lanai. And Annella says that, you know, she'll let me tell the story from 1985 on. So in 1985, when my daughter was, you know, when I was pregnant with my daughter, I went into early labor and ended up on Oahu. We were air evac, and I haven't told anyone this. Well, I haven't shared this story before, but long story short, they told me that if Annella ever made it, you know, if she was born, she would be much smaller than most children. Much she would have. How do you say this? She wouldn't be academically able to keep up with her classmates and so forth. Well, you see this young lady today and you see who she is and how intelligent she is and what a wonderful heart she is. And she became, and so Annella was born in 1985, and Tutu Rebecca and Uncle Ernest said that they would care for her when we worked. And so in 1985 and 1986, there they are. And my little girl with her curly hair. Oh my gosh. So Uncle Ernest was one of the last Hawaiian cowboys of Lānaʻi Ranch. And Auntie Rebecca is a kaupuiki. She was raised at Keomoku. Her papa was the kahu for one of the Hawaiian churches on the island. And these are Annella's tutu. They took the place of my parents and raised my daughter in a very traditional manner. And she can share a little bit more about that. Annella, I'm not sure if you want me to go beyond that or if you want to talk a little bit about what the expectations were for you before we go past that.
How old were you here, Annella?
I don't know. How old was I, Mom?
Probably around 2.5. As you can see, she had already caught up, and it was because of the canned salmon and the fish and poi that she had every day. She used to tell me, Mama, I want sardines. I want sardines. She wanted sardines. She wanted to eat sardines, which was fine with me because my Portuguese Greek grandpa always used to, during Lent, we always had sardines for dinner. We'd have fried sardines and potatoes, which was a Greek dish for dinner. So sardines, I was very familiar with. And the young lady grew up on canned salmon, sardines, and poi.
And can I just say
Sure.
that the sofa in this photo, I just got rid of it last year.
Okay. Okay, so you want to take from here?
Yeah, I mean, like, growing up with them was, I mean, I couldn't be in the house. You know, it was, my mom dropped me off in the morning. I had to rake all the eucalyptus leaves, or actually, like, my papa made me, when he went, like, fashioned a broomstick, or he took the broom part off, he cut the end of the stick, and then he pounded a nail into it, cut the flat head off, and then sharpened that edge so that I could just poke the leaves, right? So I went around poking all the eucalyptus leaves and had to, you know, like, put them all in the bikini bucket so that we could throw them away. And then he had the most beautiful akuli. And then I'd have to help him weed all of the akuli patches. And he had pink, he had white, he had orange, he had, you know, every color in just in rows. I mean, in like rows of flower beds. And then it was lunchtime. I could go inside. I could eat my sardines and poi or chicken noodle soup and rice. I could watch Sesame Street, and then I had to take a nap. That was pretty much my upbringing, right? And then in the afternoon, before my mom or dad picked me up after they were power work, I went up to the horse pasture with my papa, and we fed the horses, and we, you know, gathered horse manure for fertilizer and things like that, right? So it was very outside, Aina based, right? And then, you know, Lānaʻi has a big outdoor living culture, right? Where people hunt and fish. So it was always people bringing them fish, and always, you know, my dad and my brother's tutu man, who he was brought up by another Hawaiian family, the Maritas. You know, they were always hunting, and so we always, you know, there was always people cleaning meat and things like that. So it was always very immersed outside, right? I mean, I don't know how many times I probably came home covered in mud, right, Mom?
Yeah, yes, definitely.
But that was the experience growing up. And then in the summers, it was, you know, my mom ran summer school for Kamehameha when they had the summer programs at the public schools. So we'd have summer school half day, and then we'd go to the beach every single day and just like surf and, you know, play at the beach all day. And, you know, we did it over and over again every summer. So it was a very outdoor immersed experience growing up. And I mean, I tell people, and I think others that grew up here can agree, that I had the best childhood ever. And I'm so blessed to have had that experience. It wasn't without struggle though. And I think these people that we see on screen were there, and, you know, so that my mom could sort of spearhead the challenges that we had while that pretty much were my life here, right, Mom?
Yeah, yeah. And so you see this wonderful lady here, and I think what Ānela is leading up to is, I went to pick her up one day, and Auntie came to the door, and she said, "They're gonna knock down my house. The man promised us that we could live at Ko'ele forever until we died. And now they're going to bring the bulldozer tomorrow and they're going to knock down my house. But I'm not going to let them do that. I'm going to chain myself to my house. And when the bulldozer comes, they can take me with the house." And that was my wake-up call, that it was time for me to get involved in what was happening with the proposed developments on the island. You see, David Murdoch had promised Auntie and Uncle in front of people at the Senior Citizen Center that they could live there until they passed away at Ko'ele. Those of you who have been to Ko'ele, you know where the Orchid House is in the back, or what was the Orchid House. That was where Uncle and Auntie's house was. They were the spirit of Ko'ele. And now their home was going to be taken. And for me, that was a signal that, no, I cannot sit back. I need to be involved. I need to help give Lānaʻi a voice, a choice in what happens to this island and to her people. And so for me, that was the impetus for meeting with a group of people and deciding that we needed to form a group, a citizens group, that would advocate for the island. The name of the group is Lanaians for Sensible Growth. And it was very, very difficult because if you would take a look at the membership list, the public membership list for the island, you would see teachers, firefighters, people whose jobs were not tied to the company. Because anyone whose job was tied to the company, who would have spoken out against the company, risked losing their jobs, which meant, as Annella shared with you, many of them don't own. So they risked losing their jobs, so their livelihood, they risked losing the house that they're living in, the house that they were renting, and they risked everything, because if they weren't working for the company, there was no room for them on the island. And so our membership list was actually kept under lock and key in our attorney's office. And fortunately for us, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation became our best friends and represented us in all of our legal battles. So Lanaians for Sensible Growth still exists today. We were asked back in the 90s, I think, well, are you a nonprofit? No, the organization is not a nonprofit. So how did we survive till today? We survived on the generosity of the people of Lānaʻi who were willing to step up and be heard, and on the generosity of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs and the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation. And it is because of that group of people, and then all the other people behind whose names could not be disclosed, but who would stop by and leave notes at my house and notes at somebody else's house and call on the phone and say, oh, I heard this, can you check it out? And it was because of that, our Coconut Wireless, that we were able to go head to head. Auntie Pua Burgess used to tell me, hey, alo, you always have to, it has to be, if you're the head of this organization, you need to speak to the head of that organization. And what the company did in those days was always had an underling who would work with the community. And then when we'd reach an agreement, all of a sudden that person was gone and they'd bring another one in. And it was their way of stalling, trying to keep us, trying to wear us down because we didn't have money. And they had the deep pockets. But the truth of the matter is, there are there were and continue to be people on Lānaʻi whose chief purpose is to continue to give life to that island, to continue to value the people, the sacrifices that people have made over the years and so forth. Just really quickly, Ānela talked about water. Fortunately, unfortunately perhaps, water is scarce on the island. Fortunately for us, and I say fortunately, Ānela told you about the 11 resorts and the 500 plus homes, luxury homes and so forth. Fortunately for us, the limiting factor on the island is water. That's why pineapple, they couldn't raise sugar because it required too much water. And as with every other community, you know, you'll see how agriculture goes from sugar to pineapple and then houses. The same thing happened on Lnai with the pineapple plantation. But the company, or whoever it is now, cannot develop additional projects outside of the project district because the sustainable yield of water, potable water in the island, is 6 million gallons. And back in the mid to late 90s, they had already reached 3.5 million gallons, at which time you trigger oversight. And so that is a limiting factor on the island. The development cannot continue as they wanted it to because of that. And so they've tried a number of things. They've drilled wells all over the place, and the fight continues over water and the difference between potable water and not non-potable water and high-level aquifer water. And you know, 1985, and Annella, how old are you today? Yeah, okay. So 30 some odd years, and the fight continues. But we're not going to go away. We are not going to go away. It is our kuleana to ensure that the archaeological sites are safe, that people have rights on that island, that there is social justice and so forth. So, I mean, there's so much more that I could share, but Annella, I think you're ready to share.
Well, hello, Martha. Thank you so much for sharing. A lot of people, they really don't know this history, this background about Lānaʻi or all the fights that have gone out. So we really appreciate you sharing. Annella, I know when we talked the other night that you talked about growing up and you had your mom for inspiration and you were going out to all of these things and seeing these things go on as you were growing up. But you also talked about other women mentors that you had on Lānaʻi, and I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, of course, you know, I had my mom, and she, I think, played an instrumental role in this community. I think there are many, many people that will tell you that because she taught for so long, and she was able to relate to a lot of students. You know, there are people who are probably one generation above me who pretty much remember me as, you know, they'll tell me, I remember when you was a little girl, you know, running around in your mom's classroom, or every year she took her students to Hawaii Island for a week and visited all of the different, you know, historical sites, as well as Kilauea. And, you know, I went on that trip every year. And that's sort of, you know, where I sort of found a love for Hawaiian history and culture. And it, I think it, you know, made it deeper to me, right? And so I had my mom, I had my tutor, Rebecca, who was just an angel. You know, she was one of my earliest memories actually is one, pounding on the soda cracker buckets in her kitchen, making pretend they were pahu, and just like chanting any kind at the top of my lungs. And, you know, she was encouraging it. And she told my mom, you have to get this girl into hula, you know? So I remember, I was thinking about it the other day. I remember the first day that I went to Papa Hula. I remember driving in my mom's little blue Honda Civic to my tutu's house, and all of my implements were in the basket to go to hula that evening after she picked me up when she was PAL work. So I'll share my screen again.
Expensive, so the entree is going to be small because that's how restaurants like.
But here's another photo of probably one of the first hula performances that I had, and the woman in the back was my kumu, my first kumu hula, Rita Moon.
No, what's it called? Saloon Open.
And she was a very strict kumu. One thing I remember about her is one time in Papa Hula, one of my hula sisters was chewing gum, and she made my hula sister take the gum out of her mouth and put it on her nose and dance with the gum on her nose the entire rest of the class. So a lot of the inspiration and the discipline, you know, that I have, or that I'd like to think I have, maybe, came from her and her strictness, you know, and it also set me up for when I graduated from high school. During high school, I went to Kamehameha, and I sort of stopped dancing because I couldn't really find a place that I felt, you know, was a safe space for me as a hula dancer. During high school. After I graduated, I was lucky enough to, blessed enough to, my auntie Nona Kamai was good friends with Auntie May Lobenstein because they knew each other from St. Patrick's Church. And so my Auntie Nona told me to call Melia Lobenstein Carter, who I still dance for today. I've been with her the past 18 years, I think. And thank God for the discipline I learned from Auntie Rita, because Melia was even more strict. And I thought when I first started dancing for her that she hated me. Melia hated me. But it wasn't until later that I realized that she pushed me harder than anybody else because she saw the potential. And sorry, I told myself I wasn't gonna cry. But I'm so blessed to have her in my life, and my hula sisters that I have now as well, you know. And then of course, another opportunity that came in college was Kaho'olawe, and the opportunity to go there. And that was presented to me by Auntie Daviana McGregor, who was on the panel last month. And I was in her class, and she offered opportunities for her students to do community service learning, right? It was part of her curriculum. And so one of the opportunities was Kaho'olawe. And I actually, the first time I went to Kaho'olawe was in 2005 on the Kirk side. So for those of you that, you know, went to Kaho'olawe, you know that there's the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana camp in Hakiwawa, and then there's the Kirk base camp in Honokanaia. And it's two totally different experiences, kind of, right? So the Kirk occupies the old military barracks, and that's where they base their operations out of on Kaho'olawe. And so we get to Kaho'olawe, helicopter just landed, and I walk into the barracks and there's a radio on the window. And I turn on the radio and Hawaiian Soul is playing on the radio. And I think like for me, that was a huge aha moment, right? Like, wake the hell up, Annella, like, you know. So that's how, you know, kind of how that was the hook, line, and sinker pretty much to Kaho'olawe and its grasp on me, right? And it wasn't until I started going to Kaho'olawe that I was able to hone my skills and sharpen my tools to set me up to come home to Lānaʻi and begin sort of trying to carry on the legacy of my mother in, you know, working to preserve our cultural history, our natural resources, things like that. So to answer your question, you know, there are many, many women influencers in my life. And I know this isn't Aha Wahine, but I cannot go without mentioning my dad. You know, I was super close to my dad growing up. And I think that my dad was the one that, you know, even though it wasn't always like said to me, it was, he was the one that pretty much taught me that there was no limit to what I could do, you know, because of my gender. I could do whatever I put my mind to, and in one of my interviews for First Nations Fellows program, actually my interview to get into the program, which is, you know, kind of a prestigious program, I shared the story of how I fixed a lawnmower by changing the carburetor. And that was like a defining moment for me, you know, because like academics always came fairly easy to me, but it was, you know, those kinds of things that were challenging to me. But I knew that when I accomplished them, like that's when I would be like, Dad, guess what I just did, you know? And I think that was right after he passed away that I did that. And it took me like 6 months to fix the damn lawnmower, but I was able to do it, you know? So, you know, I cannot go without mentioning my dad. He was a huge factor in my life, and he saw no gender, you know, when it came to, I mean, I was the only one that could help him, right? When he needed help, an extra set of hands. So it was like, Ānela, go down there and take the blue wire out and rewire it to the da-da-da, you know? So that was just how it is with him, you know? So, I mean, yeah.
I love that story.
Mahalo.
And gosh, you know, we want to talk with you for hours and hours, but we don't even know what you're doing right now on Lānaʻi. And we have just a couple of minutes and we're going to talk to you and Mama. But can you tell us what you're doing on Lānaʻi these days? And then maybe just tell us how you ground yourselves. What do you do when you're not working and you're not on the Zoom? You know, how do you find your center?
Yes, so my role on Lānaʻi these days is I actually work for the Four Seasons Resort, which is actually owned by the majority landowner on Lānaʻi. And my role is actually a direct result of my mother's work on Lānaʻi. You know, part of her work was to establish the Lānaʻi Culture and Heritage Center. And my role came about as sort of an outreach person for the resort, a cultural specialist, and sort of expert, even though I'm nowhere close to an expert, on Lānaʻi, to share, you know, these cultural traditions and history with both our team members as well as our guests, right? So facilitating facilitating experiences that help others establish a sense of place, right? And that all goes back to, you know, what was pounded into us on Kaho'olawe, right? Take what you learn here and take it home with you and apply it to your everyday life, right? And so, you know, like, that's what I try to share with our guests, right? Whether it's how you feel like you're a part of a big family here, or it's, you know, the values that we live. You know, I think that Hawaii and Lānaʻi and the way we live here can have a major impact on the world, right? And how we view this planet and our world community. So that's sort of my work here. And then to answer your other question, to sort of decompress, I really enjoy making things. So I like to sew, I like to make lehulu, I like to, I have a laser cutter, a glow forge, and I love to make things on that. And I like to, I always make sure that I take my dog walking every day. That's a priority. And exercise, keep myself healthy. Those are my, yeah.
That sounds like a good way to just kind of chill. I love that. Martha, tell us, what do you want to make sure, before we close up, what do you want to make sure that people know about Lānaʻi and what's going on there and what it's like to raise a family there, perhaps? And we just have a couple of minutes. I'm so sorry, but it's important to you to let the rest of us know.
Sure. I think the thing that people need to know about Lānaʻi and what it's like to raise a family there is that when my children were growing up, there was always a sense of community. I cannot say that it exists in the same form that it did back then. And one of the things that I would encourage people to do is to try their best to build that sense of being together, of caring for one another and caring for the land, and making sure that you respect yourself first, and that respect then you extend to everyone else. That's what I learned on Lānaʻi. We were different, and yet we were the same. And it was most important to share those differences and to come together to grow in the differences as well as the sameness. That, and I'm not sure if that makes sense to people, but it is in diversity sometimes that we get stronger as well as in that sameness. And Lānaʻi taught me those lessons. I didn't understand what people were saying. They were speaking Ilocano, Tagalog, Visayan, and so forth. But the one thing that all of those parents and all of those children brought into my life was the importance, as did the Hawaiian families and the people around us, the importance of sharing as a community, the importance of acknowledging one another for the things that they brought to the table, and the importance of sharing. That's Lānaʻi style. Annella, if you could share Auntie Irene's saying about Ko'ele, I think that captures what we cherish about that island.
Yeah, so the saying that she's referencing, so Ko'ele, for those that don't know, is was the ranch headquarters at the turn of the 20th century. So from the late 1800s to early 1900s. When the Lānaʻi ranch was operating, that is where the cowboys lived. And that is where my tutu and my papa lived. And there was a horse owners association, I guess like in the 60s and 70s and 80s even, kind of trickled out in the 90s. But everybody would gather at my tutu and my papa's house, right? And my tutu, you know, always had food for everybody and everybody was welcome. And that was at Ko'ele. And Auntie Irene Perry, who was born on Lānaʻi, she passed away a couple years ago at the age of 101. But she shared a sort of a poem, I guess, about Ko'ele that kalamai anake if I get it wrong, but Iwaina o ka pakipika, aya o Hawaii. So in the middle of the Pacific, there is Hawaii. Iwaina o Hawaii, aya o Lānaʻi. In the middle of Hawaii, there is Lanai. I ka mole o Lānaʻi, aya o Ko'ele. At the root of Lānaʻi is Ko'ele. And I think those of us that grew up there and the people that had were blessed to have had, you know, Tutu Rebecca and Papa Ernest in their lives feel that way. And, you know, to this day, Ko'ele has a special spirit about it, but so does Lānaʻi. You know, I mean, like, it wasn't until I moved to Oahu and, you know, began going to graduation parties there that I realized that, oh, not the entire island comes to the grad party. You know what I mean? Like, not that you don't have to bring food to the grad party, you know, because that's just what we did, right, Mom? Like, even though you weren't asked to bring food, even though you were just a guest and you were invited, like you brought a dessert or, you know, like, and everybody came and everybody was there, you know, like that's just how it was. Yeah. And even till today, you know, we wave at cars passing by on the road. We talk story in the store. Even now, you know, we have to stand outside in line, right? Because the store is only allowed so much capacity. But even in the lines, right, we're talking story. Line at the post office, we're talking story. We're getting the scoops, you know, and that's just like what makes Lānaʻi, you know. And you know, I'm so entirely blessed to have been raised here and to be living here still, you know. Yes, Auntie Penny, sounds like Molokai. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Ko'ele is is the root of Lānaʻi, which is in the center of Hawaii.
Yes.
We are the Piko, and there you have Piko in the background, don't you?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we've gone a little bit over, but I see that most of you are still with us. So mahalo nui for staying with us. Martha and Annella, there aren't a lot of questions, but there's so many comments about how much we've all learned tonight, how brave you folks are, just how interesting your mo'olelos are. So mahalo nui. Ka'iu, you have any closing thoughts?
No, I just want to say mahalo to the stories. You know, I've been to Lnai several times over the years, and I remember going to that first graduation party in the high school gym, just like Anella's talking about. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the whole island of Lānaʻi is at this graduation party, and they all had their tables. I remember when we went up the first time and they took us around the island, because I was like, how come everybody's right in the middle of the island? And they said, oh no, they used to live all over the island, but because of historical thing, they're all concentrated. So I really just enjoyed hearing all the stories and learning more about some of the things that I knew just a little bit about. And thank you, Martha and Annella. That was so interesting. And we're so happy that you were able to join us.
Thank you. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui for having us.
Interesting.
Bye.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't feel
Well, and
worthy of
for-
being amongst the panel of women that, you know, you folks have as guests, but mahalo nui, mahalo nui, mahalo nui. And I'd like to share, you know, if these stories and if this history sparked your interest, there is the Lānaʻi Culture and Heritage Center website, which presents so much information on Lānaʻi, and that's lanaichc.org. It presents a timeline, information, all sorts of things. And then there's also a mobile app that you can get a link to from that site that has information on many of the sites on Lānaʻi. You know, we're blessed because of the lack of development that a lot of our archaeological sites are still very much so intact, you know, and the stories of those sites are shared on that app. So, and online at Lānaʻi CHC. So mahalo nui, everyone, for joining us. We're very blessed to be here tonight. Mahalo.
Mahalo nui. It's not often that we get to learn a little bit about the island. I was at Lānaʻi Heritage and Culture Center just last year. I've been there twice, actually, in the last 2 years. So mahalo nui. Martha Evans' daughter, Ānela Evans, talking about Lānaʻi and the lessons learned on Lānaʻi, and really how those lessons are valued, and perhaps we can adapt them to our own homes as well. We've all learned so much, and everybody says mahalo nui, the way you are carrying out your mother's legacy. So aloha and mahalo nui to you both. To share screen for just a moment or two. We'd like to mahalo the people, the entities that are responsible for helping Aha Wahine Kūhinapapa. All of us are volunteers. All of us are doing this in addition to our work. Hawaii Nui Akea, the School of Hawaiian Knowledge at UH Manoa, Hawaii People's Fund, Papu'ololokahi, OEV TV, and of course Kai'io is here from Kokua Kalihi Valley. Mahalo nui to the support, for all the support that we have to be able to bring these webinars to you. At the end of the month on January 30th, this is a workshop that we have with Kumuhula Kehau Kekua of Kauai. It's called Wahine Po'aimoku, a culture to canvas, a chant and paint webinar. So this is limited numbers only. We have a handful of people who have registered already. Please go onto our website, ahawahine.org, to register for that. That should be pretty exciting. Sponsors include Ahakane and Hula for the Alliance of the Arts. I can't read that anymore. And mahalo nui. So I'm Kim Ku'ule Bernie from Papu'ololokahi, along with Kaululaau.
Sorry, mahalo from Kaululaau Odom. Thought you were just going to say my name.
All right. Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha nui. Aloha nui a kako.
Ahui ho.
Hui ho.
Ahui ho.
Mahalo.